Okay, it is 11 o'clock by my watch, so hello everyone. Thank you for coming today. My name is Amy and I'd like to welcome you all to this Church Urban Fund webinar called Welcoming and Supporting Refugees. We really hope that this next hour together is going to be helpful to you in some way in your work as a church supporting and helping refugees. So this webinar today is in partnership with Welcome Churches, who are an amazing organisation who are helping churches to be a welcoming community for refugees. We're also going to be talking about some small grants that we have currently, which might be the right fit for you if you're going to be running a project that helps refugees arriving from Ukraine or Afghanistan. So before we begin properly today, just a little bit of housekeeping. This session is being recorded, but your faces won't be on the recording. We will be sending around the recording afterwards, and we'll also pop it up on our website so that you can direct other people to it if they are not able to be with us this morning. You should be able to see a little Q&A button at the bottom of your screen where you can post questions as we go along. And we'll then have hopefully 10 to 15 minutes or so at the end where we'll have a chance to answer them. So do pop them in that box. Once questions start being posted, you should also be able to upvote them if you particularly like them to be answered. So I would now like to hand over to Rhiannon and Helen, who are joining us today from Welcome Churches. Thank you so much, Rhiannon and Helen. I'll hand over to you now.
Hi, good morning. Really great that you could be here with us today. My name's Helen and I'm here with my colleague Rhiannon from the charity Welcome Churches. And we're really pleased to have the opportunity to introduce you to the work of Welcome Churches and the ways you might be able to partner with us in welcoming refugees and those seeking asylum. So in our time together, we're going to be giving you a bit of an overview of Welcome Churches. We're going to look at an outline of how people are coming to the UK and what happens when they arrive. And we'll be giving you a bit of a flavour of the training that we offer to our network churches and those who choose to partner with us. So we're together for quite a short time today. It's a bit of a whistle-stop tour, but we'll be happy to answer any questions you have at the end, as Amy's just mentioned. So I'm going to start with a story, and I'd like you to imagine, if you can, what it might be like for this to be your story. Your journey to the UK was horrendous. You left your country to escape persecution from your own government. You didn't have time to go home and collect your belongings. In fact, your family had called and told you not to come home as the security police were looking for you. So you picked up a few things from your friend's house and then fled. You knew if you got caught, you most likely would be executed. And going to an airport would prove impossible under these circumstances. To cut a long story short, by the time you actually arrived in Kent in the UK, you were exhausted. You were in debt, your backpack had been stolen, you were depressed, tired, and probably badly needed a shower. You spoke to the officials about seeking asylum and got sent to a hostel in London for a few days. Then they moved you again to a hotel in Skegness. You're in a room with a guy from Sudan, but you can't understand each other. It's a bit scary. You wonder how long you are going to stay there, or if you're going to be moved on again anytime soon. Today, you are feeling very down, so you just stare out of the window at the people on the pavement. You feel a million miles away from your home, and a million miles away from the local British people on the pavement below you. So at Welcome Churches, our vision is for no refugee arriving in the UK, however they got here, to be alone. We want everyone seeking asylum and safety in the UK to be welcomed by their local church and find a place to belong within the community. Deciding to seek asylum is a hugely difficult and complicated decision to take, one that isn't taken lightly. We can look in Deuteronomy chapter 10 and verse 19, where it says, welcome the stranger. God is telling the Israelites to welcome the stranger, for you were foreigners in Egypt. And as Christians, of course, we have in Jesus the repeated call to welcome the stranger, the alien, the ones who are outsiders. So we are working across the UK with churches to do just that. We equip, train and resource churches who are or who want to be supporting refugees and those seeking asylum. We currently have well over 1,000 churches on what we call our Welcome Network. And these are churches who are committed to welcoming refugees into their church and their communities. Our network is a simple to use web platform and a secure national referral system. This helps refugees themselves, churches and other organisations to find the churches around the country who are committed and equipped to welcome refugees. Many of our network churches are running our fantastic Welcome Box project as well. And that's a project which commits to a more targeted support of refugee and asylum-seeking individuals and families new to their communities. And we'll be happy to answer any more questions about that if you'd like to know more at the end. Now, at Welcome Churches, we believe in these 6 principles as the foundations of welcoming refugees and asylum seekers. You'll see we've got welcome, empowerment, building community, relationship, religious freedom, and justice, just to explain a little bit more about each of those. So welcome. We believe that Christians are called to love and welcome strangers, whatever their cultural background. We believe every church has the privilege and opportunity to welcome and care for refugees and asylum seekers in some way. When it comes to empowerment, refugees are resilient and creative. We want to be part of restoring choice and power in their lives. We want refugees to grow in their gifting and leadership, and we want churches to benefit from their unique contribution, as many around the UK already are. And of course, churches are well placed to provide community and care for those who have lost homes and family and may be recovering from trauma. So building community is another one of our 6 principles. Then relationship. We value relationships with other organisations, networks and individuals. We help churches connect relationally with partners in their own communities to provide integrated support for refugees. Religious freedom is a really important principle, and we hope it's self-explanatory. We believe that refugees arriving in the UK should have complete religious freedom. And finally, justice. The church should be at the forefront of challenging injustices faced by refugees and asylum seekers, as well as the fear and prejudice within our wider communities. And that is no more important than it is right now if you're paying attention to the news. Now, at Welcome Churches, we use the language of neighbours to describe refugees and people seeking asylum who we meet. We find it to be a helpful way of thinking about our interactions with who we will be welcoming and about how those relationships might develop as refugees become more independent in their new lives. And of course, to be a neighbour means so much more when we think of how Jesus defined a neighbour in the parable of the Good Samaritan. So in summary to this overview, we believe every church has both the responsibility and the opportunity to get involved in welcoming refugees. Let's move on then to spend some time thinking about who our new neighbours, using that language, might be. And this is an outline of how people are coming to the UK. No, it's not, it's who's coming to the UK first, I do apologise. Okay, so this slide shows the top 10 nationalities of people who came to the UK to claim asylum for the year ending September 2022. So that's the most recent stats that we've got. So you'll see we've got Albania, Iran, Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Eritrea, Sudan, India, Bangladesh, and Pakistan. Now, it's important to say that this map doesn't include people who came to the UK through what we call resettlement schemes, which we'll mention a little bit later. So If you're surprised not to see, for example, Ukraine or Hong Kong there, then that's because they came through these resettlement schemes. But I'll just leave that up there for a moment or two. Maybe you can consider if any of those countries surprise you, if there's any country that's missing that you would have expected to see there. Each country there has got a kind of a unique set of circumstances that gives rise to why they're on that list. The most recent stats have Albania near the top. That's quite a new entry so far up the list, but it has always been generally in the top 10. And of course, it's interesting that Afghanistan is there, despite the fact that we have got an actual official resettlement scheme. They're also quite high up on the list for people who are coming through the asylum scheme as well, as I say, which we'll talk about a little bit more in due course. So some nationalities are more likely to be granted leave to remain in the UK, and this next slide shows the percentage of people from each country of origin who were granted asylum at the initial decision following their application for asylum. And the statistics change from year to year in direct correlation with the circumstances in the country of origin, which you'd probably expect. And this affects the percentages of those who are granted asylum. So, for example, if you look at the stats, rates for granting asylum to people from Syria were high in 2022. They're sitting at sort of 98% grant approval rate, whereas grant rates for people from India were low at just 4%. So if you've got any more questions about any of that, again, we'll be happy to circle back round to those at the end. So let's just quickly look at the two main ways that refugees come to the UK. And this is really important since it will determine the type of support they are entitled to receive. And so we'll begin by talking about these resettlement programmes that I've mentioned. And it's important to remember with resettlement programmes that refugee status is given to people on resettlement programmes before they enter the UK. So it's already been decided that they are official refugees. Many of you will have heard, for example, about the Syrian Vulnerable Person Resettlement Scheme, or VPRS, and this closed in 2021, but 20,000 Syrians have been resettled in the UK through this programme. And of course, others, now that scheme is closed, continue to make their way here independently too, through the asylum route. In 2021, an emergency Afghan relocation and assistance policy, or ARAP, allowed Afghans who had worked for the UK government in Afghanistan to come to the UK with their families. And so you may have heard of the ARAP scheme. Although it has slipped out of the news, many Afghans are still housed in hotels around the UK, waiting for more permanent housing. And there is also a resettlement programme for Afghans, which, like the Syrian scheme, aims to resettle a total of 20,000 Afghans. So those are both resettlement schemes. And at the moment, of course, much of our attention has been drawn to the plight of Ukrainians, also seeking sanctuary in the UK. And they have the Homes for Ukraine scheme and the Ukraine Family Scheme. So you may have come across those, and those are other official resettlement schemes. Now, let's talk about the asylum route. And the important point here is that people seeking asylum can only apply for refugee status once they have physically arrived in the UK. There's no way for the UK government to assess their claims until they are physically on UK soil. There is no such thing as an illegal asylum seeker, contrary to what some people might have you believe. Under international law, anyone has a right to claim asylum in the UK. According to the 1951 Refugee Convention, any person with a well-founded fear of persecution for reasons such as race, religion, sexuality, and politics can avail themselves of protection in another country. So therefore, it is not illegal just to claim asylum in the UK. And interestingly, the 1951 Refugee Convention recognises that people may have to use irregular or unconventional routes to escape, and to claim asylum in another country. And campaigners have urged for the creation of safe routes so that people do not have to resort to dangerous journeys like crossing the Channel, as we've seen in dinghies. Refugees who make their own way to the UK to claim asylum face many challenges and hardships, especially as they are not normally allowed to work and they receive little financial support. The process for claiming asylum in the UK is lengthy and complex, and if their application is unsuccessful, they can face lengthy appeals and then sometimes detention in immigration centres and, of course, eventually deportation. Those whose asylum applications are refused may choose to voluntarily return to their country of origin, or they may be forcibly removed from the UK, which is more likely. Refugees who are unaccompanied minors, when they arrive in the UK, become the responsibility of social services until they reach the age of 18. Now, I've just noticed a question in the chat. Someone's asked, how much notice does the government tend to give before closing resettlement schemes, e.g. Syria in 2021? I think this is very contextual and it very much depends. There isn't sort of a hard and fast rule. Some schemes are very much obviously only set up for a specific amount of time. And then other schemes like the family reunification scheme of kind of sort of the DUB scheme, for example, that's sought to have minors come over. I've lost the word. Reunify, family unification. That was kind of closed all of a sudden at a political whim. So it kind of, it very much depends on the scheme and the government of the day and their wishes. I hope that's answered your question. I don't know if Rhiannon, you've got anything else that you can add on that.
Yeah, just to say, so in a previous role, I was working for a charity that coordinated the refugee resettlement across the Liverpool City region, and it was difficult to get information from the Home Office as to what was happening when the programme was due to close. So it can, I think long and short of it is not a lot of notice, but just a lot of radio silence often. But what we saw with VPRS, obviously there was the complication of COVID. So I think that made things more difficult to kind of plan moving forward. But they decided to, before ARAP started, there was a UKRS, so a UK resettlement scheme. So rather than being specifically for Syrians, there was going to continue to be a pledge to resettle refugees, but they were going to be from all nations rather than just specifically for Syria. So Syrians would be able to continue to be resettled through UKRS rather than through the Syrian Vulnerable Persons Resettlement Scheme. But then obviously the crisis in Afghanistan then came up. So then there was specifically a programme for that. So my understanding is it continues to be a UKRS programme, but it's always really difficult to get information on the numbers for that and the nationalities that are going to be eligible for that as things kind of change. So there's not always a lot of notice, but obviously there's not a lot of notice for things that are going to happen in the world as well. So I guess we do have to give our government grace for not always being able to plan ahead for some of these things.
Thanks, Rhiannon. Very graciously answered as well. Well done. Okay, so the next slide shows what happens once someone makes a claim for asylum in the UK. And you'll see a little flow chart there of what happens. So the screening interview, once they've claimed asylum, that happens sort of almost immediately. Once they present themselves to the authorities to make an asylum claim, they have this screening interview. It's at this point a decision will be made about age or anything that might make the claim obviously inadmissible. Then the gap between that interview and what's called the substantive interview, that can be a really long wait. It used to be just a few months, but currently some people are waiting more than a year, sometimes even more than 2 years. And as you can imagine, waiting for a decision like that can take a really long time. So you've got the gap between the screening interview and the substantive, I can never pronounce this word, substantive interview. You've got that, and then you've got the gap between the substantive interview and the actual decision taking place. And the whole process can take a very long time and will leave those seeking asylum in limbo. And it can be incredibly unsettling for them, just waiting for other people to make decisions about their lives. Meanwhile, asylum support in the form of housing and money is provided by the Home Office while an asylum claim is being considered. And there are different types of asylum support that the Home Office provides, depending on the stage of the asylum process someone is in. So in terms of money, asylum seekers receive around £9 a week if they live in initial accommodation like a hotel. So all these hotels that are in the news, they're sometimes referred to as bridging or contingency accommodation. You know, they'll have their food provided and a roof over their head, and then they'll get £9 a week with a £3 supplement per week for babies and pregnant mums. So this will have to cover any travel they're doing on the bus, for example, to get to shops or to go to important meetings about their case. Any sort of mobile phones that they're using, any clothes that they want to be wearing, that's got to cover all of that. So it's not much at all. Once someone claiming asylum is in what we call dispersal accommodation in the community, so they've been moved out of the initial accommodation, and this might be moving to a house or a hostel, then they will be entitled to quite a bit more. So it's £45 a week. But that's obviously got to then cover all their food and all their toiletries, as well as all the other things I've mentioned. So it's not really very much. And any money is received via something called an Aspen card, which works like a credit or debit card. There has been a lot of petitioning to the government to change this, and there may be some changes coming up which will allow more people seeking asylum to legally work whilst they wait for their case to be settled, which would see them better off financially. And if truth be told, it's what they'd much rather be doing. They haven't come here to sponge off the British government or us taxpayers. They've not done their research before they've arrived. They've not chosen our UK because of how allegedly generous we are. They'd much rather be contributing to the country. And what I will just do now is point you towards a website. I think Rhiannon's put it in the chat. There you will find much more information about all of this, including that flowchart that we've shown you. It's the Right to Remain website, so righttoremain.org.uk/toolkit/asylum support. It's a really good website to go on to get more information about all of the things that I've just said. So I'm now going to hand over to Rhiannon for a flavour of the training that we offer to our network and welcome box churches. So Rhiannon.
Thanks, Helen. So Helen's given us a really great overview about the asylum process and some of the refugee routes into the UK, just to give you a flavour for how all of that works and where people are coming from. And now we're going to just spend a little bit of time thinking about cross-cultural awareness, trauma awareness, and the importance of setting boundaries in our work, supporting refugees and people seeking asylum. So in the training that we offer at Welcome Churches, among other things, we cover cross-cultural and trauma awareness and the importance of setting boundaries in our work. To give you a small flavour today, let's begin by having a little look at cross-cultural awareness. So when it comes to welcoming people from other countries and cultures, we're aiming to do two very simple things. We want to give a warm welcome from our church in the UK, and we want to be a learner in terms of other cultures. So as we think about other cultures, we also think about our own and begin to ask ourselves which things are solely from our own culture and which things are also biblical. we remember that even things that are biblical can be expressed in different ways in different cultures. For example, the mandate of hospitality. So one way of thinking about culture which can help us approach this is to consider which cultures are generally more task-oriented and which cultures are more relationship or people-oriented. Those cultures that are generally more task-oriented are in Northern Europe, including the UK, the Northern American states, Australia, and Canada. Broadly speaking, efficiency and being on time are high priorities, and these show respect for the other person. Hospitality is usually planned in advance with an invitation and perhaps questions about what you prefer to eat or not to eat. So an unexpected guest may not always be welcomed in. But what about more relationship-oriented cultures? So these can include countries in the Middle East, Asia, Africa, and South America. Broadly speaking, a person takes priority over efficiency and time. Hospitality is spontaneous, often without an advanced invitation, and an unexpected guest will always be warmly welcomed. They may be given food by the host, but they won't necessarily be asked what they would like to eat or drink. A new neighbour from a relationship-based culture might struggle with different things to the person from a task-oriented culture that they find challenging. And Helen, I think you've got a helpful example of some work that you've done previously.
So I was helping to support a family that moved into my community under the Arab scheme. So this was one of the official resettlement routes last year. And it was really interesting because I found that I was much more preoccupied with the notion of having a date and a time to go and visit. And ultimately, the dad of the family ended up just saying to me, look, just come by anytime you want, just knock on the door, it's fine, we'll be here. And in my head, I'm like, I haven't got time to go on a visit if they're not going to be here. I've got a things to do list today. I really wanted to know if they were going to be in, otherwise, in my view, it kind of would have been a waste of my time, which sounds awful. But it was really interesting because he was much less obsessed with setting dates and times and things than I was about going around to visit. He was very much just come anytime, that's absolutely fine. And then on back the other way, he was actually helping me out with something to do with some other refugees in the area that involved him coming around to my house to drop something off. And I could not get him to actually confirm when he was coming. And I found it really frustrating. And then he just kind of turned up on my doorstep at a really inconvenient time. And it's really kind of caused me to try and kind of take a step back and think about my priorities and where people fit into them. But equally, there's a reality to my life as well. So I found it quite jarring in a way. And there was definitely a difference. Definitely. Yeah.
Thanks, Helen. And I think some of us may be aware of those things that we carry either as part of our personality or part of our culture, but often we're not aware of them until they come into, not conflict, but they're contrasted with a completely different culture. So it's just a really helpful exercise to kind of think that through, what that means for you. We're now just going to have a little think about trauma awareness. So as well as possible cultural differences, when welcoming our new neighbours, we also need to be aware of trauma. It's important to say first that people from a refugee background are often incredibly resilient. They are survivors. They've made dangerous journeys and survived. They've experienced trauma, war, persecution, and survived. Whilst it's true that they need support to re-establish their lives in a new country, which may take a long time, there is much that we are enriched by and can learn from refugees. Also, it's really important to clarify that we aren't trying to fix anybody's trauma, and we certainly aren't in the business of offering anyone a diagnosis. It's just helpful to have a basic level of awareness around the challenges that our new neighbours are living with, so that we can be helpful and not harmful in our welcome. So we use this iceberg illustration to remind us to treat people with grace and gentleness each time we meet them. So on the surface, you can see perhaps there'd be feelings of relief, feeling safer, hope for the future, expectations of a better life, happy to meet you, and overwhelmed at your kindness. But underlying there could be feelings of guilt and loss of leaving, concern for family members, loss of the familiar, overwhelmed with paperwork and decisions, perhaps fearful of Western culture and fear of return. And trauma can spill out in lots of ways. Tears are an obvious reaction, but there are other signs of trauma that we may see in people when we meet them here in the UK. This is something that we cover more in depth in our training, but we've included a few here to share with you. So these are some of the signs of trauma that you may notice in people. So they might be hypervigilant, looking for danger, easily panicked, may have a concern about who to trust, perhaps a narrowing of attention or a deep fatigue. And this can lead to forgetting meetings or forgetting to bring the paperwork that we've asked them to bring, or sometimes a total lack of planning. Or perhaps they have difficulty putting together a story of what has happened to them. There may be anxiety around memory triggers, so for example, loud noises, fireworks, car alarm. This is something to be aware of, particularly around bonfire night. Perhaps someone may display anger at those helping, that we can't help them more, or frustration that their family members and those they love aren't eligible or able to come to the UK. Perhaps withdrawal or depressions. This could look like sleeping a lot or very low mood, or a total loss of identity and hope with low self-esteem. Some physical symptoms can also be a sign of trauma, although clearly it's not for us to diagnose that. Of course, just because someone is exhibiting one or more of these signs doesn't automatically mean a person is traumatized. But when we meet our new neighbours, it's important to be aware that these signs could be a reflection of the trauma they have experienced and continue to experience as they watch the news and hear about their country and their relatives and friends there. We offer a more in-depth look at trauma as part of the training that we can provide to churches in our network, where we take a greater look at what trauma is and what causes it. Volunteers are not expected to be professionals, and we do occasionally bring in those who are to offer even more targeted training. But having a little awareness can help us to understand and empathise with our new neighbours better. Now we're just going to have a little think about setting boundaries. So as part of our welcome, it's also important to set boundaries for the well-being of all concerned. Again, we cover this in more detail during our training for what we call our welcomers who run our Welcome Box project, but this is a bit of a brief overview for you. So when people first arrive and receive help, it's very humbling and for some a very difficult experience. They will need good information so that they can start to understand life in the UK and can get out of the house on their own and find their way around. Our aim should always be to increase our new neighbours' social network so that they do not become dependent on us for support. That's a really important first boundary to set. So what does that look like? Well, we might help a neighbour identify what services they need support to access rather than assuming we know. Let a neighbour know what options are available to them, so giving them choice. Avoid telling people what to do is really important. So we're not necessarily legal experts or housing experts or school experts. And asking them if they would like help in communicating with services rather than assuming again that that's a role that they want us to play. And if they say yes, we only communicate what they have asked. So for example, Mahmoud would like you to call his solicitor. So you would say, Mahmoud would like to know what progress has been made on his case. So just being really specific and understanding from the neighbour what it is that they want to find out. It's really important to ensure that everyone involved is safe by making sure that appropriate safeguarding and data protection measures are in place. We also need to be careful to respect the privacy of our new neighbour. Their story is theirs to tell, not ours. We are there to listen, show support, and be a good friend, not to probe into their past experiences. They may want to tell their story, but they don't owe it to anyone. If people share parts of their story with us, we should value their privacy and not share the story with others unless absolutely necessary. And we should also avoid showcasing people. We are all keen to meet and welcome our new neighbours. They may have amazing stories and even spiritual stories of how God saved them or provided for them. It can be empowering for some people to have their story heard, but people might also feel unable to say no to your request. They need to control their story, and they don't owe it to the church just because we are helping them. It's also really important to be aware of power dynamics. So when someone is disempowered in life or suffers great loss, and someone comes alongside them and starts to support them, helping them in significant ways, there can be a hidden power dynamic going on. The person who is being helped can easily feel indebted to the one helping them, and they are not able to always say no to any suggestions or requests. So these are all things that we help churches think through in our training and through our resources hub available to all churches on our network. And just in closing, before we finish our section of the presentation, the current migration of Ukrainians is the third mass migration to the UK in the last 18 months. We've welcomed Hong Kongers, Afghans in August 2021, and now Ukrainians, along with many, many more who are seeking sanctuary here from elsewhere. We believe that God is shaking up the UK church, and there is a challenge before us. He is placing people before us as a church in ways that we could not have imagined in the past. Many of us are sensing God's work in us, calling us to respond and grow in our understanding of mission, of biblical welcome, and of our own personal response. There is a huge challenge for us as the UK church to respond to those coming here seeking safety, whether it's for a relatively short time or whether they will stay and make the UK their new home. At Welcome Churches, we equip and support churches to welcome those arriving here in the UK seeking safety. We'd love to partner with you if you feel God might be calling you to this work too, and we'd be happy to answer any of your questions at the end. I think there's been a question or two pop up while we've been chatting, but Amy, I don't know if you want to continue and then we can.
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you. Yes, thank you for popping those questions in the chat, those who have done that, in the Q&A box, I should say. We will come back to those at the end. Thank you so much for that, Helen and Rhiannon. So much useful information in such a short space of time, relatively. Thank you. I'm now going to hand straight over to Jay, who is going to talk to us about the small grants that we currently have. Again, if you have any questions about the grants as well, please put those in the Q&A box. Over to you, Jay. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, so if you've been inspired by what you've heard today, and especially as Helen was talking about building community and the importance of empowering people who are in such a vulnerable position, we have funding available, which could be a continuation of a project that you are already running, or it could be the beginning of the launch of your social action programme. But we have those between £500 and £5,000 available for small projects, which are helping groups of refugees. It is limited to Ukrainian and Afghan refugees. It was just decided by our funder that those were the groups that did seem to need the most urgent help. So it is limited to them. But if other refugees are in your area and do want to come to those services that you're providing, that's absolutely fine as well. Unfortunately, what we can't do is fund individuals or organizations who are representing individuals or single families. We're just trying to maximize the impact that this funding can have. And so we're trying to keep it to larger groups. We've had some really fantastic projects through so far. Ones where perhaps churches which are located near to hotels, this hotel accommodation, and as Helen said, they get £9 per week, which means that even just providing a warm place for them to go, which means they can get out of the hotel and perhaps get a hot drink and start to integrate into the local community, can mean so much to people. So I'll just share our website. This is where you can apply and also find all of the information. Can you see the screen? Yep, excellent. So this is our website, Church Urban Fund, the homepage. It's cuff.org.uk. If you scroll down a little bit, we're looking for the lovely sunflowers. Here we go. This is supporting refugees in England. Here on this page, we can find the amounts, the kinds of things that we provide funding for. There's also more about the projects which we funded into 2022. So if you want to have a look at what other people are doing and perhaps look for inspiration, then there's a list there. And We have the guidance document, which we do recommend you read carefully before applying. If you do have any questions, we're very happy to help and provide any information that you need. There's a budget template. You don't need to use this. It's just there to help you. And then we have our online application form here. The deadline is 31st of March for application. And then the project activities, the funded activities, should be finished by the end of June, as we have reporting deadlines as well. So it's pretty straightforward. There are some more resources for supporting refugees from our partners, and there we go. Our contact details from the grants team in particular are there. We have a phone number, and we have grants@cuf.org.uk email. So any further questions about eligibility or criteria, we'd be very happy to help.
Wonderful. I wonder, Jay, if you might be able to share with us a couple of examples of, I know you said there's that page on the website of grants that were funded last year. If you might be able to share like a couple of examples of other things that people have been doing.
Yeah, let's see. There's one of the projects that we funded was Christ First Watford in Hertfordshire. They're part of the Welcome Church Network, and they've been providing regular support and activities for over a year to around 300 refugees from Afghanistan. But they're currently in that hotel accommodation. And so what this church has been doing is working in partnership with the local city council to help refugee students settle into school. So organising the school uniform, school equipment for children. Obviously, they did get a tiny supplement for mothers, but obviously school expenses are quite high on top of that. And so they've been helping to support people to get into education and then start that integration process. They also have a youth club, ladies driving lessons, and they provide access to a sports facility so that people can play sports, keep active, which really helps people's physical and mental well-being. And another example, we have Connect Exminster down in Exeter. It's a small village, but they've had a really coordinated response. So they've had a lot of refugees there, and they've been providing support for transport and finances, English teaching. They've had a network to find donated goods and also provide befriending for people so that they can start to integrate. They've had 370 volunteers, so they've had a really overwhelming community response, and they're supporting at least 30 Ukrainian refugees there, and they've got further 15 from the surrounding villages who are also taking advantage of their projects. So they're providing English classes for 3 different ability levels, and a weekly activity group for Ukrainian women to meet the locals with crafting and to help them integrate and improve their English, as well as some local outings to help people see where they live. So some really lovely uplifting projects and a great community response.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Jay. I'm going to go to the Q&A now, and let's see what people are asking. So to Rhiannon and Helen, I think this one would be for, if you'd like to come back. Someone has asked, would you be able to help with links to official sources explaining the resettlement schemes for refugees from Afghanistan and Ukraine in detail? Do you know where someone could find something like that?
I can see Rhiannon's got her thinking face on. I don't know if you're about to say something or you're not, Rhiannon.
So I'm just something to explain the scheme to refugees themselves. Is that what we mean?
I don't think it's necessarily to refugees. No, I think just similar to what you had in your presentation, but perhaps going into more detail about how the resettlement schemes work, the process within them.
Yeah. I can't think off the top of my head, but I'm sure there is something that we'll be able to send you. Amy, are you able to send that out to people after the presentation? If we
Yes,
find
I
some...
can. Yes, we can include it in our email. We go out with the recording. It's a good idea. Thank you.
Great.
Yeah, if the government website isn't clear enough, it's always great to look at the Red Cross website. I always find that really helpful, explaining things. But we'll look and see if there's anything else there that might be helpful.
Great, thank you. The next question is, many asylum seekers have been here over a year, so can now technically look for work in certain jobs. If they do take a job, how does this impact on their accommodation or shelter rights? Are they still allowed to stay in their accommodation, or are they expected to find their own?
This is, I mean, technically them being able to work and the chance of them actually being able to work and get a job are two very different things. But I think what's really important is just making sure that people are getting advice on that so that they can make an informed decision, because it can be very appealing to take on a job, but as you say, understanding what that will then mean for the support from the Home Office. So Migrant Help should be able to give advice on that. That's a free helpline that people can call, and they should have access to an interpreter. Otherwise, pointing them in the direction of a Citizens Advice Bureau or something like that. But people can, when they claim asylum and they put in their application for support, they can, there is a check that the Home Office will do in terms of any monies that they've brought. So often if people have brought money into the UK and they make it known that they have that money, sometimes they will get housing accommodation, but they won't get any financial support. So it may be depending on their income that the Home Office will continue to house them, but they wouldn't get that money every week that they have been receiving. But yeah, it's just really important that people are getting all of the information that they need so that they can make an informed decision, and making sure that any monies that they are getting, they're making known to the Home Office so that they're not getting into trouble. Because obviously if they then break the law while they're here, then that would impact their asylum claim. So yeah, just making sure. And there are specific projects that support refugees into work. Again, I can't remember the name off the top of my head, but I'll have a little look for you after the training and I'll send that out, because they'd have more specific information as well.
Great, thank you, Rhiannon. Jay, can I get you to answer this one aloud, just because I think other people might be thinking the same things. The question about with the small grants, did you mean that while we can only apply providing it's for Ukrainian or Afghan people, but other nationalities can attend or participate in the funded services?
Yeah, so the requirement that's specification for Ukrainians and Afghans came from our funder, and that was decided last year as part of the resettlement scheme, and it was just seen at the time that was a group that could benefit a lot from this funding. We don't want to ask people to turn other refugees away. Obviously, we could say that Ukrainians are in a better position than most, and there are lots of needy people and vulnerable people in the community, and we would never ask you to turn people away based on their nationality. For our reporting purposes, we do need to put numbers of, well, how many Ukrainians has this grant helped, how many Afghans. So we would ask you in the reporting, when you at the end of your project, how many people of these nationalities have you helped? But if other people have availed themselves of your activities, then that is absolutely fine by us. We wouldn't want to dictate that.
Great, thanks, Jay. And back to Helen and Rhiannon. Someone's asked about what are churches required to do to join the Welcome Network. Perhaps that was in your video, and I was wondering if maybe we could go straight to the website and maybe share the screen of the website, and we could actually, we've got a couple of minutes still, we could maybe watch that, or feel free to just answer that.
Well, it'd be great to do that, but I don't think that will answer the question directly, although it's a lovely video. It's more aimed at refugees and those seeking asylum, and it explains a little bit more about our charity. But just before if we are able to watch that video, to answer this question, to become a Welcome Network church, you need to designate a church coordinator for the project. You need to have the name of your church leader, and you need to have the name of the person who manages data in your church, and they could all be the same person or 2 different people, depends on the size of your church, that's absolutely acceptable. It's completely free of charge. There's a little bit of an online form to fill in, but it's really straightforward. The best thing to do is to go to our website and have a look at joining the network, and that will give you some more details about signing up to that. If you want to join the Welcome Box project, which is something a little bit different, a bit more specific, there is a charge to that, but it might be something that you can get one of these grants for, and that's just to cover a little bit more in-depth training and support and advice in a more targeted project with asylum seekers and refugees. But again, it's all on the website, and equally you can message myself or Rhiannon, and we'll be happy to have a conversation with you one-to-one if you've got more particular questions. It says here, oh, that's not for us, I don't think. This is for Jay. That's appeared in the chat, so I'll let you take that.
Yeah, so the question was, if it's not a church but Christian charity, are they eligible? And yes, so registered Christian charities, for that we look for some information in your ethos or your website that you have been funded for Christian purposes. And if you do find yourself ineligible, so perhaps your church or a local, your charity isn't Christian, your church doesn't have the resources to do a project, but you could partner someone with someone who is eligible. So we have had applications from, for example, if there's a refugee organization and they are really keen to work with Afghan refugees, but they're not a Christian organization themselves, they could partner with their local church to provide that, and combine their power, and then we could consider that application.
Thank you so much for that, everyone. Thank you for coming along and for spending the hour with us. I do hope it's been useful to you in some way. As I said, we're going to send around the recording to you via email, and we'll include those links to things that we talked about as well. Hopefully that will come out to you by the end of the week. Thank you so much for coming along. Thank you again to Rhiannon and Helen for coming and sharing with us. Thank you to Jay for talking to us about grants. And that's it, everyone. Thank you so much. Have a lovely afternoon. Bye, everyone.